The morning sun cast long shadows across the Edwards Air Force Base as Sarah Martinez adjusted her worn leather briefcase for the 100th time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the desert chill, but from the electricity of possibility coursing through her veins. Today was supposed to be the day that changed everything. Today, she was supposed to board a military transport jet that would carry her to Washington, D.C., where she would begin her career as a civilian aerospace engineer with the Department of Defense. Sarah had dreamed of this moment since she was 8 years old, watching fighter jets streak across the sky above her grandmother's house in New Mexico. Back then, she would lie on the dusty ground, her small fingers tracing the contrails against the endless blue, imagining herself among the clouds. Her grandmother, Rosa, would find her there every afternoon, dirt in her hair and wonder in her eyes. "Mija," Rosa would say, settling her creaking bones beside her granddaughter, "what do you see up there?" "Freedom, abuela," Sarah would whisper. "I see freedom." Rosa would nod knowingly, her weathered hand smoothing Sarah's dark hair. She understood better than most the weight of those words. Sarah's childhood had been anything but free. Her father had abandoned the family when Sarah was 3, leaving her mother, Elena, to struggle with addiction and the ghosts of her own traumatic past. By the time Sarah turned 7, Elena's battles had become too much to bear, and Rosa had stepped in to raise her granddaughter. But even Rosa's love couldn't shield Sarah from everything. The neighborhood where they lived was rough, controlled by gangs who saw children as either assets or obstacles. When Sarah was 9 years old, she made the mistake of walking home from school through territory claimed by the Los Serpientes. 3 older boys cornered her in an alley, demanding the few dollars Rosa had given her for lunch money. Sarah had tried to run. She remembered that much clearly. The sound of her sneakers slapping against concrete, the heavy breathing behind her, the moment when strong hands grabbed her backpack and sent her sprawling. What happened next was burned into her memory with painful clarity. The leader of the boys, a 16-year-old named Miguel with tattoos already covering his arms, had pulled out a knife. "Next time, you pay the tax," he had hissed, pressing the blade against her left shoulder. "This is so you remember." The scar that resulted was jagged and angry, running from her shoulder blade down toward her collarbone. The emergency room doctor had done his best, but the damage was deep. As Sarah healed, the scar tissue formed a permanent reminder of that day, raised and discolored, impossible to hide completely. But, rather than breaking her spirit, the attack had forged something harder in Sarah's core. She threw herself into her studies with fierce determination, earning straight A's and spending every free moment at the library. Rosa encouraged her granddaughter's academic pursuits, scraping together money for books and school supplies, even when it meant going without herself. "Education is the one thing no one can take from you, Mija," Rosa would say, helping Sarah with homework at their small kitchen table. "It's your ticket to fly." High school brought new challenges and opportunities. Sarah excelled in mathematics and physics, catching the attention of her teachers who encouraged her to apply for advanced programs. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, became a mentor and advocate, helping Sarah navigate college applications and scholarship opportunities. "You have something special," Mrs. Patterson told her during their weekly meetings. "Your mind works differently than other students. You see patterns and connections that others miss. Have you ever considered aerospace engineering?" The suggestion hit Sarah like lightning. She had always loved planes and space exploration, but it had never occurred to her that she could actually build the machines that soared through the skies. That night, she researched aerospace engineering programs until her eyes burned from staring at the computer screen. College at New Mexico State University was a revelation. For the first time in her life, Sarah was surrounded by people who shared her passion for flight and space exploration. She devoured every course, from fluid dynamics to orbital mechanics, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in aerospace engineering. Graduate school brought new horizons. Sarah earned a master's degree in aeronautical engineering from Caltech, focusing on advanced propulsion systems. Her thesis on hybrid rocket engines caught the attention of several aerospace companies, but it was Dr. James Chen, a professor with connections to government contractors, who opened the door that would change her life. "Sarah," Dr. Chen had said after her thesis defense, "have you ever considered working for the Department of Defense? There's a new program starting up, classified work on next-generation aircraft. Your background in propulsion systems would be perfect. The application process had been intense. Background checks, security clearances, psychological evaluations, and multiple interviews with officials whose names she wasn't allowed to know. But Sarah had persevered, driven by the same determination that had carried her through childhood trauma and academic challenges. 3 months ago, she had received the call. She had been selected for the Advanced Aerospace Development Program, a top-secret initiative working on revolutionary aircraft technology. The pay was excellent, the work was cutting-edge, and she would finally be living her childhood dream of working with the machines that ruled the skies. Now, standing at Edwards Air Force Base, Sarah felt the weight of her journey. In her briefcase were her orders, her security clearance documents, and a letter from Dr. Chen wishing her luck. Around her neck, hidden beneath her professional blazer, hung a small silver cross that had belonged to Rosa, who had passed away just 2 years earlier. "I made it, Abuela," Sarah whispered to herself, touching the cross through her shirt. "I'm finally going to fly." The transport area was bustling with activity. Military personnel moved with practiced efficiency, loading cargo and conducting pre-flight checks. Sarah approached the checkpoint where a young airman sat behind a folding table, reviewing documents and checking passengers against a manifest. "Good morning," Sarah said, offering her brightest smile as she handed over her paperwork. "Sarah Martinez, reporting for transport to Andrews Air Force Base." The airman, whose name tag read Phillips, barely glanced up as he flipped through her documents. His expression was neutral, professional, but Sarah noticed him pause when he reached her medical records. She had been required to submit a complete medical history as part of her security clearance, including documentation of all scars and injuries. Phillips looked up at Sarah, his eyes scanning her visible skin. "Ma'am, I need to verify something. The medical records indicate a significant scar on your left shoulder and back. Can you confirm this?" Sarah's stomach tightened slightly, but she nodded. "Yes, that's correct. It's from a childhood incident. Everything is documented in my file." "I understand that, ma'am, but I need visual confirmation for security purposes. We need to ensure you match your medical records exactly." The request caught Sarah off guard. She had been through countless security procedures over the past months, but no one had ever asked to physically examine her scar. Still, she understood the importance of thorough security measures. "Of course," she said, glancing around at the busy transport area. "Is there somewhere private where we can handle this?" Phillips shook his head. "Ma'am, I'm not authorized to leave my post. If you could just lower your jacket enough for me to see the scar, that would be sufficient." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. The scar was extensive, running from her shoulder blade down toward her collarbone. Showing it would require removing her jacket and lowering her blouse significantly. The thought of exposing such a personal reminder of trauma in a public military setting made her skin crawl. "I understand your need to verify," Sarah said carefully, "but the scar is quite large and would require significant exposure to show properly. Isn't there another way to confirm my identity?" Phillips consulted his checklist and shook his head. "Ma'am, the protocol is clear. Physical verification of identifying marks is required for all civilian passengers on classified transports. I don't have discretion in this matter." Other passengers were beginning to line up behind Sarah, and she could feel their impatience. A couple of military officers checked their watches, clearly eager to board and get underway. Sarah found herself caught between her desire to maintain dignity and her need to comply with regulations. "Look," she said quietly, leaning closer to Phillips, "this scar is from a traumatic incident in my childhood. It's quite extensive and very personal to me. I've been through extensive background checks and security clearances. Surely there's some accommodation that can be made?" Phillips, who couldn't have been more than 22 years old, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Sarah could see that he sympathized with her situation, but he was clearly following orders that left him no room for flexibility. "Ma'am, I really wish I could help, but my instructions are very specific. If you can't comply with the verification requirements, I cannot authorize you to board this aircraft." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. After everything she had worked for, after all the obstacles she had overcome, she was being stopped by the very scar that represented her survival. The irony was crushing. The mark that proved her strength was now being used to deny her the opportunity she had earned. "This is ridiculous," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a middle-aged businessman in an expensive suit, tapping his foot impatiently. "Some of us have important meetings to get to. If she can't follow simple instructions, she shouldn't be here." Other passengers murmured agreement, and Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. She thought of Rosa, who had taught her to stand up for herself, but also to choose her battles wisely. She thought of all the professors and mentors who had believed in her, who had opened doors that led to this moment. With shaking hands, Sarah began to remove her jacket. If this was what it took to achieve her dreams, she would do it. But, as she started to lower her blouse, exposing the top portion of her scar, she heard Phillips clear his throat. "Ma'am, actually, I think I need to consult with my supervisor about this. The protocol might be different for classified passengers." He stood up from his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the situation that was developing. "If you could wait just a moment, I'll be right back." Phillips disappeared into a nearby office, leaving Sarah standing at the checkpoint with her jacket half off and her dignity in tatters. The other passengers continued to grumble, and Sarah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She had faced down gang members, poverty, and academic challenges, but this moment of bureaucratic humiliation was breaking her in ways she hadn't expected. As she stood there, adjusting her jacket and trying to compose herself, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe she didn't belong in this world of military protocol and classified projects. Maybe a girl from the rough side of Albuquerque was fooling herself to think she could fly with eagles. But then, she remembered Rosa's words, "Education is the one thing no one can take from you, Mija. It's your ticket to fly." Sarah straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and decided to wait. She had come too far to give up now, no matter how humiliating the process became. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of jet engines warming up, and she closed her eyes, imagining herself among the clouds once again. The story was just beginning, and Sarah Martinez refused to let it end at a checkpoint desk in the California desert. 20 minutes passed like hours as Sarah stood at the checkpoint, watching military personnel and civilian contractors board the massive C-130 transport aircraft. The desert sun climbed higher, and sweat began to gather at the base of her neck, mixing anxiety with the California heat. She checked her watch repeatedly, knowing that her window of opportunity was shrinking with each passing minute. The businessman behind her had grown increasingly agitated, making pointed comments about government inefficiency and people who can't follow simple rules. His complaints attracted attention from other passengers, and Sarah found herself the unwilling center of a growing spectacle. She tried to make herself smaller, invisible, but it was impossible to disappear when you were the person holding up an entire military transport. Finally, Phillips emerged from the office, followed by a stern-looking woman in Air Force dress blues. The woman's name tag identified her as Master Sergeant Rodriguez, and her expression suggested she had dealt with difficult situations before. She approached Sarah with the measured stride of someone accustomed to solving problems quickly and efficiently. "Ms. Martinez," Sergeant Rodriguez said, her voice professional but not unkind, "I understand we have a verification issue." Sarah nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "Yes, ma'am. Airman Phillips explained that he needs visual confirmation of a scar mentioned in my medical records, but it's quite extensive and would require significant exposure to show properly." Rodriguez glanced at the growing line of impatient passengers, then back at Sarah's paperwork. She flipped through the medical documentation, her trained eye taking in the details of Sarah's childhood injury. When she looked up, her expression had softened slightly. "I see the issue," Rodriguez said quietly. "The protocol exists for good reasons, but it wasn't written with situations like yours in mind. Unfortunately, I don't have the authority to waive the requirement, but I can offer you a private screening area." It was a compromise, but Sarah felt a spark of hope. At least she wouldn't have to expose her most vulnerable moment in front of a crowd of strangers. She was about to accept when a new voice cut through the desert air. Sergeant Rodriguez, what seems to be the delay? Everyone turned toward the voice, and Sarah felt the atmosphere change instantly. Approaching the checkpoint was a man in his late 50s, wearing the distinctive uniform of a U.S. Air Force general. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his posture ramrod straight, and his presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the area. Sarah caught sight of his name tag, General Morrison. "Sir," Rodriguez snapped to attention, "we have a civilian passenger who requires additional verification procedures. We're working to resolve the situation now." General Morrison's steel-gray eyes swept over the scene, taking in the frustrated passengers, the nervous airmen, and Sarah herself, standing with her paperwork clutched in trembling hands. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, and Sarah felt as though she was being evaluated by someone who could see straight through to her core. "What's the nature of the verification issue?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying the authority of decades in military service. Rodriguez hesitated for just a moment. "The passenger has medical records indicating a significant scar that requires visual confirmation for security purposes, sir. We're arranging for a private screening." Morrison stepped closer, and Sarah caught the scent of his cologne mixed with the crisp starch of his uniform. Up close, she could see that his face was weathered but kind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, despite his current serious expression. "Ms. Martinez, is it?" Morrison said, glancing at her paperwork. "May I ask about the nature of this scar?" Sarah felt her throat constrict. She had told this story to therapists, doctors, and security investigators, but something about General Morrison's presence made her want to be completely honest in a way that surprised her. "It's from a knife attack when I was 9 years old, sir," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Gang members in my neighborhood. The scar runs from my shoulder blade down toward my collarbone." Morrison nodded slowly, his expression unchanging. "And you're traveling to begin work with the Advanced Aerospace Development Program?" "Yes, sir. I'm an aerospace engineer, specializing in propulsion systems." "Impressive." Morrison turned to Rodriguez. "Sergeant, has Ms. Martinez completed all other security requirements?" "Yes, sir. Full background check, psychological evaluation, and top-secret clearance. The medical verification is the only outstanding item." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as though he was weighing something important. Finally, he spoke again, but his words were directed to Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, may I share something with you? When I was 12 years old, I was attacked by a dog in my neighborhood. Rottweiler that had gotten loose from its chain. The animal grabbed my leg and wouldn't let go." He paused, rolling up the sleeve of his uniform to reveal a series of pale scars running along his forearm. "I have scars too. They tell a story of survival, of overcoming something that could have destroyed me." Sarah stared at the scars on Morrison's arm, amazed that this powerful man was sharing something so personal with her. She could see the marks clearly now, faded but still visible after more than 4 decades. "The difference," Morrison continued, "is that my scars are easy to show without compromising my dignity. Yours, from what you've described, are not. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Sarah whispered. Morrison turned back to Rodriguez. "Sergeant, I'm familiar with the verification protocols. They exist to prevent individuals from assuming false identities or smuggling contraband. In this case, we have a woman who has passed every other security measure, whose background has been thoroughly investigated, and whose credentials are impeccable." He gestured towards Sarah's paperwork. "Look at her academic record. Caltech graduate, summa cum laude from New Mexico State. Published research on hybrid propulsion systems. This is not someone who poses a security threat." Rodriguez nodded. "I understand, sir, but the protocol, Morrison interrupted gently, serves the mission. Our mission is to get qualified personnel where they need to be to serve their country. Sometimes, common sense must prevail over rigid adherence to procedures." He turned back to Sarah, and she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't expected, recognition. Not just of her situation, but of something deeper. It was the look of someone who understood what it meant to overcome adversity, to carry scars that told stories of survival. Ms. Martinez, I'm going to ask you to do something that might seem unusual. I want you to tell me about your research. Not your personal history, not your scars, but your work. Help me understand why the Advanced Aerospace Development Program selected you. The request caught Sarah off guard, but she found herself responding immediately. I've been working on hybrid rocket propulsion systems that combine the best aspects of solid and liquid fuel engines. The goal is to create more efficient, more reliable propulsion for next-generation aircraft. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. Traditional systems have significant limitations in terms of throttle control and fuel efficiency. My research focuses on variable thrust hybrid engines that can adjust performance in real time based on mission requirements. Morrison nodded approvingly. And the applications for military aircraft? Enormous, Sarah said, her passion for her work overcoming her nervousness. We're talking about fighters that could achieve unprecedented range and maneuverability, transport aircraft that could operate more efficiently in hostile environments, and, eventually, spacecraft that could revolutionize how we approach orbital missions. Outstanding. Morrison smiled for the first time since approaching the checkpoint. Sergeant Rodriguez, I'm personally vouching for Ms. Martinez. Her credentials speak for themselves, and, frankly, we need minds like hers working on our projects more than we need rigid adherence to verification protocols. Rodriguez looked uncertain. Sir, I don't have authorization to waive the medical verification requirement. Then, it's fortunate that I do, Morrison said firmly. As the commanding officer for this transport mission, I have the authority to make exceptions when national security interests are at stake. And, believe me, Sergeant, getting this woman to her assignment is very much in our national security interests. Sarah felt her knees grow weak with relief. After all the anxiety, all the humiliation, and all the doubt, she was going to be allowed to board the aircraft. But Morrison wasn't finished. Ms. Martinez, he said, his voice taking on a more personal tone, I want you to understand something. The scar you carry is not a mark of shame or weakness. It's a testament to your strength, to your ability to survive and thrive despite adversity. He gestured toward the aircraft waiting on the tarmac. Every person who serves their country carries scars of one kind or another. Some are visible, some are not. What matters is not the scars themselves, but what we build from the experience of surviving. Tears gathered in Sarah's eyes, but these were different from the tears of frustration and humiliation she had been fighting earlier. These were tears of gratitude, of recognition, of being truly seen and understood by someone who mattered. Thank you, sir, she managed to say. You have no idea what this means to me. Morrison smiled again, and Sarah could see warmth in his eyes that reminded her of her grandfather, who had died when she was young but had always made her feel protected and valued. Actually, I think I do know what this means, Morrison said. Because 30 years ago, I was a young officer who almost didn't get his first assignment because someone thought my scars made me unfit for duty. Sometimes, we need someone to see past the surface to recognize what's underneath. He gestured toward the aircraft. Your country needs your mind, your skills, and your determination. Don't let anyone ever make you feel that your scars disqualify you from serving. They're proof that you're exactly the kind of person we need. Rodriguez had been watching this exchange with growing understanding. She stepped forward and stamped Sarah's boarding pass with decisive efficiency. Ms. Martinez, you're cleared for boarding. Welcome aboard. As Sarah gathered her belongings and moved toward the aircraft, she heard Morrison speaking quietly to Rodriguez about updating verification protocols to allow for more flexibility in cases involving trauma survivors. She realized that her experience might prevent other people from facing the same humiliation she had endured. Climbing the steps into the C-130, Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling around her. This was it. She was finally boarding the aircraft that would carry her to her new life, her new career, and the fulfillment of dreams that had sustained her through the darkest moments of her childhood. The interior of the military transport was Spartan but functional, with rows of jump seats along the walls and cargo secured in the center. Sarah found her assigned seat and settled in, still somewhat stunned by the morning's events. As other passengers boarded, she noticed that the businessman who had been so impatient with her earlier avoided making eye contact. A young Air Force lieutenant took the seat across from her, introducing himself as Lieutenant Garcia. "First time on military transport?" he asked with a friendly smile. "Yes," Sarah replied. "First time doing a lot of things, actually." "It gets easier," Garcia said. "Where are you headed?" "Andrews Air Force Base, then to the Pentagon for orientation." Garcia whistled softly. "Sounds like important work." Sarah nodded, thinking about her conversation with Morrison. "I think it will be." As the aircraft's engines spooled up and the cargo door closed, Sarah felt the familiar thrill of anticipation that came with takeoff. She had always loved flying, even as a passenger, but this flight felt different. This wasn't just transportation, it was transformation. The C-130 taxied down the runway, its massive engines building to a crescendo. Through the small window beside her seat, Sarah could see the California desert rushing past, then dropping away as the aircraft lifted into the clear blue sky. For the first time in hours, Sarah allowed herself to fully relax. She touched the silver cross hanging around her neck and thought about Rosa, who would have been so proud to see her granddaughter finally soaring among the clouds. "I'm flying, Abuela," she whispered to herself as the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude. "Just like you always said I would." The steady drone of the engines and the vibration of the aircraft created a meditative atmosphere. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself imagine the work that lay ahead, the aircraft she would help design, and the barriers she would continue to break down. She thought about General Morrison and his unexpected kindness, his willingness to see past protocol to recognize potential. She realized that sometimes the most important moments in life happened when someone in authority chose to use their power to lift others up rather than keep them down. The flight to Washington, D.C. would take several hours, giving Sarah time to process everything that had happened and prepare for the challenges ahead. But, for now, she was content to sit in the rumbling belly of the military transport, surrounded by the sound of engines that she understood better than most people, carrying her toward a future that suddenly seemed brighter than ever. As the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude, Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a notebook. She began sketching ideas for hybrid engine modifications, her mind already racing ahead to the work that awaited her. The scar on her shoulder, hidden beneath her blazer, no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a badge of honor, a reminder of everything she had survived to reach this moment. The story of Sarah Martinez was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The Pentagon at dawn was a sight that never failed to inspire awe, even after Sarah had been working there for 6 months. The massive five-sided building rose from the Virginia landscape like a concrete monument to American military might, its corridors buzzing with the constant energy of national defense operations. Sarah had grown accustomed to the security checkpoints, the endless hallways, and the sense that every conversation could potentially impact global security. Her office was located in the 4th-floor earring, a coveted position that reflected her growing importance within the Advanced Aerospace Development Program. The space was small but functional, with a desk overlooking the central courtyard, 2 computer terminals for classified and unclassified work, and walls covered with technical diagrams of propulsion systems that would have looked like abstract art to most people. This particular morning, Sarah arrived earlier than usual, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a sense of nervous anticipation. Today marked a significant milestone in her career. She was scheduled to present her hybrid propulsion research to a joint committee of Air Force and Navy officials, including several generals and admirals whose decisions could shape the future of American aerospace technology. The presentation was the culmination of months of intensive work. Since arriving at the Pentagon, Sarah had thrown herself into her research with the same determination that had carried her through childhood trauma and academic challenges. She had collaborated with some of the brightest minds in aerospace engineering, gained access to classified materials that most people could only dream of seeing, and developed innovations that could revolutionize military aviation. Her hybrid propulsion system had evolved significantly since her graduate work at Caltech. The new design incorporated advanced materials science, sophisticated computer modeling, and real-world testing data from classified military platforms. The result was an engine that could provide unprecedented flexibility and efficiency for next-generation aircraft. As Sarah reviewed her presentation materials one final time, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that difficult morning at Edwards Air Force Base. General Morrison had become an unexpected mentor, checking in on her progress periodically and offering guidance when she faced bureaucratic obstacles. He had taught her that success in government work required not just technical excellence, but also the ability to navigate complex political and institutional dynamics. Remember, Morrison had told her during one of their informal meetings, "You're not just selling a propulsion system. You're selling a vision of American aerospace superiority. Make them see not just what your engine can do, but what it means for our national security." The advice had stuck with her as she prepared for today's presentation. Sarah had learned to translate complex technical concepts into language that military leaders could immediately grasp, focusing on operational advantages and strategic implications rather than just engineering specifications. At 9 o'clock sharp, Sarah gathered her materials and made her way to conference room 4x10 to the power of -200, a secure briefing facility equipped with the latest presentation technology. The room was already filling with uniformed officials representing various branches of the military, along with civilian contractors and Defense Department analysts. Sarah recognized several faces from previous meetings, but she was surprised to see General Morrison enter the room just as the session was about to begin. He caught her eye and nodded slightly, a gesture that provided a small boost to her confidence. The committee chairman, Admiral Rebecca Foster, called the meeting to order with military precision. Foster was a legendary figure in naval aviation, one of the first women to command a carrier strike group, and someone whose approval could make or break aerospace development programs. "Ladies and gentlemen," Foster announced, "we're here to review the latest developments in the Advanced Aerospace Development Program, specifically the hybrid propulsion research conducted by Dr. Sarah Martinez. Dr. Martinez, you have 30 minutes to change our minds about the future of military aviation." Sarah stood and moved to the front of the room, connecting her laptop to the presentation system. As the first slide appeared on the large screen, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves that always preceded important moments. But underneath the anxiety was a deeper confidence, built through months of rigorous work and the knowledge that her research could genuinely make a difference. "Distinguished committee members," Sarah began, her voice clear and strong, "today I want to show you an engine that will redefine what we consider possible in military aviation." The slide behind her displayed a cutaway diagram of her hybrid propulsion system, its intricate components labeled and color-coded. Traditional rocket engines force us to choose between the throttle control of liquid fuel systems and the simplicity of solid fuel systems. Hybrid engines promise to give us the best of both worlds, but, until now, they've been limited by combustion instability and poor performance characteristics. Sarah clicked to the next slide, showing test data from recent experiments. "Our breakthrough came from reconceptualizing the fuel grain geometry and developing new additives that stabilize the combustion process. The result is a hybrid engine that provides variable thrust capability while maintaining the reliability advantages of solid fuel systems." Admiral Foster leaned forward in her chair. "Dr. Martinez, what kind of performance improvements are we talking about?" "Significant ones, Admiral," Sarah replied, advancing to a comparison chart. "In fighter aircraft applications, we're looking at a 25% improvement in fuel efficiency, with the ability to adjust thrust dynamically during flight. For transport aircraft, the efficiency gains are even more dramatic." She clicked to a video simulation showing her engine design in operation. But the real advantage isn't just efficiency. It's flexibility. A fighter equipped with hybrid propulsion could operate in stealth mode at low thrust for extended periods, then switch to maximum power for combat engagement, all from the same engine system. General Morrison spoke up from his position at the back of the room. "Dr. Martinez, can you address the reliability concerns? Hybrid systems have historically been prone to combustion instabilities." Sarah smiled, grateful for the question that allowed her to address one of her research team's biggest achievements. "Excellent question, General. We've solved the instability problem through a combination of fuel grain design and real-time combustion monitoring." She advanced to a technical diagram showing the internal structure of her engine. "The key innovation is what we call adaptive fuel geometry. The fuel grain is designed with variable surface area that changes as it burns, maintaining optimal combustion characteristics throughout the engine's operational life. Combined with our new combustion stabilization additives, we've achieved stability levels that exceed traditional solid fuel systems. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah walked the committee through technical specifications, performance data, and operational scenarios. She showed how her hybrid engines could be adapted for everything from unmanned drones to intercontinental bombers, demonstrating versatility that could simplify military logistics and reduce costs across multiple aircraft platforms. The questions from committee members were pointed and technical, covering everything from manufacturing costs to battlefield maintenance requirements. Sarah answered each query with confidence, drawing on months of research and analysis that had anticipated these exact concerns. Colonel James Wright, representing the Air Force's Acquisition Command, raised his hand. "Dr. Martinez, this all sounds impressive in theory, but what about practical implementation? When could we see these engines in operational aircraft?" "We're currently preparing for full-scale prototype testing," Sarah replied. "Based on our development timeline, I believe we could have operational engines ready for integration into existing aircraft platforms within 18 months, with new aircraft designs optimized for hybrid propulsion following shortly after." Admiral Foster exchanged glances with other committee members before speaking again. "Dr. Martinez, your presentation has been thorough and impressive. However, I have a concern that goes beyond technical specifications." She paused, studying Sarah carefully. "You're asking us to commit billions of dollars and years of development time to a technology that, while promising, represents a significant departure from proven systems. Why should we trust that this hybrid approach will deliver on its promises?" The question hung in the air, and Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling around her. This wasn't just about technical specifications anymore, it was about trust, credibility, and her ability to convince seasoned military leaders to take a calculated risk on revolutionary technology. Sarah looked around the room, taking in the faces of admirals, generals, and senior officials who had dedicated their careers to protecting American interests. She thought about her journey from the rough neighborhoods of Albuquerque to this secure briefing room in the Pentagon, and she realized that her personal story was inextricably linked to her professional capabilities. "Admiral Foster," Sarah said, her voice taking on a more personal tone, "you're absolutely right to ask that question. Revolutionary technologies always involve risk. Sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen when the world seems determined to keep you down. Picture this, a young woman standing at the gates of destiny, watching her dreams slip away because of a single piece of paper. But what if I told you that the very thing meant to destroy her became the key that unlocked everything she never dared to hope for?" This is the story of Sarah Martinez, a woman whose childhood trauma carved a permanent mark on her body and soul, yet ultimately became the bridge to her greatest triumph. It's about how a general's keen eye saw beyond military protocol to recognize true courage. And it's proof that sometimes our deepest scars don't represent our failures, they tell the story of our survival. What you're about to read will challenge everything you think you know about strength, determination, and the unexpected ways the universe conspires to put the right people in the right place at exactly the right moment. Because sometimes, being denied entry is just the beginning of the most incredible journey of your life.